Okay, once again, now not very many people took me up on this offer last time, but once again, I would offer that, or even suggest, that you email me if you have specific questions about the material since the last midterm that you would like me to focus on during the review. And I will try to remember to put some practice problems on DSpace, but if I don't, by the end of today, somebody send me an email and remind me. In answer to the question, if anybody happens to be raising their hands right now without me being able to see it, the answer to your question is no, there will not be any material from before the first midterm on this exam. Okay, does anybody have any other questions at this stage about the upcoming exam? All right. Is there, what was the long line of people going into Campbell Hall? Is anybody? Free stuff? What? Oh, they're giving away stuff. Okay, are these people in that line, do you suppose? I'm confused. Okay, so what are we going to do today? We're talking about behavioral economics and public policy, once again. And I'm just going to finish up talking about the optimal sin tax, which we started looking at last time, where we tax smokers as a way to try to help them to not smoke suboptimal cigarettes, to try to get them to internalize the harm that they ignore because of their beta-delta discounting. And we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between Pareto improvements and Hicks-Calder improvements. And I want you to get really familiar with those terms. They show up in problem set 7. And they really are among the most important concepts that economists have to contribute to the field of public policy analysis. Okay. Then I want to talk about policies that are arguably win-win, which is another word for Pareto optimal, right? Nobody loses. And show you, this will be my last the last episode of Shameless Self-Promotion, a little bit of research that I've done with a co-author on an online game called Webboggle, which I think is kind of fun. And then we'll talk about briefly about a set of policies that we might consider to be sort of almost Pareto, you know, like where maybe somebody gets hurt, but maybe just a tiny little bit, and maybe we think it's not a problem. And then we'll talk about a concept that you may have heard of in the news, which is Libertarian Paternalism, which is, well, I'll explain it when we get there. It's, people have various different reactions to it. Mine is mixed. Okay. Oh, in your handout, is there a little TM symbol right there? Trademark? Yeah? Okay, good. So I have the wrong version of this. Amazingly, we're going to look at a piece of academic research, the name of which has been trademarked. Okay, so let's go back to where we were last time. We had a situation where we have smokers. We're ignoring the fact that smoking is addictive. We're just looking at the fact that smoking has a short-term payoff because it's pleasurable and a long-term cost because of the health impacts. And I just want to touch on something I didn't mention. The short-term benefit, I'm assuming, is the consumer surplus. It's the difference between the pleasure you get and the price you pay. So in the model that we did, we didn't talk about the price. So we're just assuming that that B in the model, the short-term benefit, is the net benefit of the pleasure of smoking minus the price per cigarette. So here's the setup that we have. We have this thing, which is the observed demand curve, which I'm calling demand behavioral. And it's the observed demand curve because, of course, it's what we actually see the person do on the basis of their behavioral bias. And then we have some idea that if we subtract it off from the height of that demand curve, which is supposed to be the marginal willingness to pay of the consumer, which is supposed to be the benefit that they get out of smoking, if we subtract it off from that, the portion of the long-term cost, 1 minus beta times C, that they don't internalize because of their self-control problem, whether they're naive or sophisticated, then we get sort of this other thing, which I'm calling DRAT, or derational. It's not really a demand curve, because the demand curve tells us how much people will want to consume at a given price. And this is not telling us that. This is telling us maybe how much they should want to consume. But a more straightforward way to think of it is it's the actual marginal benefit that they get, as opposed to their willingness to pay, which is inflated. So the point of this derational is that it tells us, for any given price, what the person, what a rational smoker would do and what a sophisticated beta-delta discounter would want to do. And we'll call that QRAT. And I think where we left off last time was I was showing you, if the internality, this 1 minus beta times C, is large enough, by which I mean large enough relative to the consumer surplus from smoking, right? So in this case, it's a big proportion of the total consumer surplus, which is that height, right? Then you could easily wind up in a situation where the smoker, right, if we put in that tax, then the price that the smoker actually pays is this. They will locate here at the optimal quantity. I think I'm not going to call it Q. I'm going to call that Q opt. I like that better. And as a result, they will pay this much in tax. However, there are all these units that they're not consuming that were worth less to them than the price, right, because of the non-internalized cost. And so this is how much previously they were paying for those, and this is the actual value they were getting out of them. So that was the harm being done to them before the tax. And so this is what I'm going to call harm reduction. Whoops, harm reduction. To borrow a term from drug policy. Okay, and you can easily see how if the internality is large enough relative to the short-term benefit of smoking, that the harm reduction could outweigh the tax payment. I think that's the case here. I think my triangle is bigger than my rectangle. I hope it is. That's the intention. Okay, so bigger than tax payment. So if that's the case, if the benefit that we've done to this person is greater than the harm we caused them by making them pay tax, then that's a Pareto improvement, right? We've made this person better off according to their own preferences. But if the person is a naive, then they might not think so. One of the things that if you make it, I'm aware of the problem set, although it's only one problem, is I think it's the longest one we've had yet, and I apologize for that. A lot of that is just that the prompt is really long. But if you get to the end, one of the questions that you'll be asked has to do with, you know, sort of the role of rationality in preferences versus rationality in expectations when it comes to how we evaluate public policies. So if this person is a sophisticate, by the way, we get to say the Pareto improvement whether they're a sophisticate or a naive. We, as the sort of, you know, global overseer of society and all goodness, get to say that this is a Pareto improvement because we know that the person is actually being made better off in the long run, even though their short-term self might not think so. If they're a sophisticate, which is to say, right, self-control problem, beta-delta means that they have non-rational preferences. Sophisticate means that they have rational expectations. If they have rational expectations, they will see this as beneficial, right? They will see this as a Pareto improvement, okay? And they will prefer the tax over no tax. If they're a naive, in the short term, they will think to themselves, I don't need that stinking tax. I may have a self-control problem right now, but I'm going to quit tomorrow. I don't need that tax. You're hurting me. So that even though, in fact, over the long haul, they might look back on the tax and say, like your parents told you when you were a kid, one day you'll thank me for this, right? They might look back and say, oh, I'm so glad I had a big brother looking out for me in the form of the government. But in the short term, they might very well not see this as a Pareto improvement. So rational expectations interacts with irrational expectations interacts with irrational preferences in a complicated way when it comes to how we actually evaluate the desirability of this kind of policy. Okay, now let's introduce another wrinkle, which I think is the kind of thing that really we have to take into consideration if we're doing public policy analysis. Whoops, did I skip? Where's my extra slide? These two slides are in the wrong order. Do you have that slide where it says if the internality is smaller before this slide that says what if some smokers are not rational? I'm very sorry. This slide is supposed to come first. So we'll call that one, and we'll call this 2. Okay, what if some smokers are not irrational, right? In other words, they have rational preferences and rational expectations. They don't have a self-control problem. They smoke only those cigarettes where they've completely taken into account all of the future harm, and they say, you know what, I know this is going to take me from, level 1 emphysema to level 1.001 emphysema in the future. It's going to make me just a little bit worse off in the future because of the health consequences, but I need to smoke right now. So I'm going to do it. Let's say that there's a mixture in the population of those types and our behavioral types, whether they be naive or sophisticated. We're going to let that go. These are just beta, delta, naive or sophisticated. We don't know. Now, what do we have here? I've kept it so that the harm being done here is relatively small compared to the total sort of consumer surplus in the short term is fairly large, and the harm is fairly small. That doesn't matter for this analysis. What's going on? Here's where the behavioral type this is Q market for, sorry, how do I want to do this? This is Q market for the behavioral type. Okay? And this is where we feel like they ought to be, so that's Q opt. It's also where the rational type will be, right? So this is also Q market for the rational type. Okay. Now, what we want to do is we want to get the behavioral type, right? If you're in public health, I can guarantee you that you believe that the number of people and the number of smokers who are not irrational is 0. Okay. So if you're in public health, you're saying economists are nuts. We'll impose a tax because that's the kind of people who go into public health. So you do that, and what happens? Sure enough, you get the behavioral types to Q opt, but of course you are going to push the rational types down here to Q market for the rational. Sorry, not Q market. Q. What should we call this? Let's call it Q tax for the rational type, something like that. Q tax rat. All right. So that's what will happen. These guys will go down to there. And now let's do the welfare analysis. Okay, we know where the harm, and by the way, we're just going to forget about the tax for now, because regardless of whether the individual likes the tax or not, we as a society don't need to care about that, because we take the tax payment and use it for something else that is beneficial to society, so we're going to treat that as a transfer. Right? This is one of the lofty, high and mighty things that you get to do in your policy analysis. So we're going to forget about the tax payment for the moment. But let's just look at the trade-off between who in society gets benefit and who gets hurt. As before, this is the harm reduction for the behavioral types. But we know that if you impose a tax on somebody who's already choosing rationally and there's no externalities and there's no other distortions in the market, you're going to create what? Dead weight loss. And hopefully by now in your career, and if not by now, then very soon, you should be able to figure out where dead weight loss is in one of these diagrams without having to be shown. You find the suboptimal units, the units that you either should have been consuming that you're not because of a tax, or that you shouldn't have been consuming but you are because of a subsidy. So the suboptimal units, which is anything between the optimal and where the person actually winds up. And then you just measure the difference between the benefit that they received and the benefit that they received and the cost to society of generating that benefit, which in this case is, we're assuming sort of a flat supply curve, so it's just going to be the price. So it's the difference between the benefit that the rational type would have gotten and the cost that they would have paid, and it's this. Now, because I used linear demand curves and made the internality 1 minus beta times c constant, so that everything's straight and parallel, what do you notice about these two triangles? They're the same. They're the same size, which means that if we were really confident of our estimate of beta, and we were really confident of our estimate of c, the long-term health cost, we could confidently impose this tax on the cigarette market and trust that it would be a Hicks-Calder improvement, right? A net increase in social welfare, consumer and producer surplus, if the proportion of rational types is no greater than 1/2. Because the harm we're doing to the rational types is exactly equal to the benefit we're creating for the behavioral types. And as long as they're 50-50, or as long as the rational types are no more than 50% of the population, we can still say that this is Pareto improving. Okay? Now, if you're in public health, then you wave your hand at a 50% upper bound on the number of rational smokers. You say, that's ridiculous. But you might not. Some ordinary folks might say, no, we're not so sure. Ordinary folks, my God, how patronizing is that? Reasonable people could disagree. So let's look at a different approach. How could we maybe increase our confidence? What if we make the tax smaller? So here we're going backwards. Wait a minute, what happened? Okay, what if, this is where I want to be. This is supposed to be 2. What if we make the tax smaller? Same exact preferences, same exact irrationality, same starting price, but now let me just add a little small tax. Okay, on top of whatever taxes we've already got. What am I doing now? Okay, I'm going to push the behavioral type. I'm not going to get crazy about the subscripts and superscripts. I'm going to push both types down a little bit. So it looks like it's kind of the same thing, right? You're still affecting their smoking habit the same amount. But look what happens to the welfare analysis. The dead weight loss is still this little triangle. That's easy. Because the first cigarettes that this person gives up are the ones that they care about the least. Now, the first few cigarettes that the behavioral type gives up are also the ones that they care about the least in the short-term sense, but in terms of the long-term harm that they're doing, these first cigarettes are the ones that are most costly to the behavioral type. So we have a situation where the harm reduction that we do with this smaller tax is proportionally much greater than the dead weight loss that we impose on the rational types. So this tax would be, so this HK up, that's my shorthand for Hicks-Calder improvement, unless the proportion of rational types is really high. And I haven't actually measured these things, but you can imagine that for a smallish tax, maybe $1 a pack, because keep in mind that we estimated the ideal tax, the optimal tax is $10.50 a pack. So suppose you put on just $1 a pack, which is like if you go to New York City, that's nothing. You could potentially be confident that you were improving total social welfare, unless you believe that the proportion of rational types among smokers was sort of like up to 90% or something. And then I think most reasonable people would say that seems unlikely. Okay, given that the proportion of people with a beta of 1 in the population is not that high, it seems unlikely that it would be that high among smokers. Okay, enough of that. Any questions about any of that? So the take-home points, and this will be driven home in the problem set, the real take-home points here have to do with thinking carefully about what's Pareto optimal and what's Hicks-Calder optimal from the standpoint of society as a whole, but then at the same time thinking about how does naivete and sophistication, how do rational expectations affect how the individual would feel about it, right? And then you've got to ask yourself, should we as a society, I mean, so this is a very silly thing that teachers do, or I don't know, maybe just all economists, we say we. It's not as if anybody in this room has the power to impose this tax. I should be using the word they. What is they, the big hand in the sky? Should the government, or even the voters, be imposing on people a tax that we have a scientifically verifiable reason to believe is going to be better for them in the long run, that they don't want? Tough call. Okay. So what I want to do now, yes, keep that, and then switch to there. So I'm doing this thing again where I'm using my slides from last semester. Yeah. What the heck what did I actually wind up putting out? Oh, I see what happened. I skipped it. Okay, so that's second of those 4 graphs where I said, what if the internality is smaller? You can do that on your own. I need to keep busting along, but I would encourage you to go and do that just as a practice exercise. What you're going to see, the intention in that slide was that the smoker is going to wind up paying more in tax. He's going to be hurt more by the tax payment than the harm reduction that they get. Okay, but the sort of the point in the bullet point there is, okay, how would this look? So you'd have a situation where they pay that much tax and there'd be that much harm reduction. And so you can say that this is not a Pareto improvement because this person is being hurt. Okay? But given the fact that this tax is actually a transfer, and the government is going to spend it on some other beneficial thing, it's actually still a Hicks-Calder improvement for society as a whole. Right? Now, neither the naive nor the sophisticate would thank you for imposing this tax on them. If you've learned any public policy analysis or the microeconomics of public policy analysis, or even if you've just taken 100A, you should have begun to internalize this idea that if something is a Hicks-Calder improvement, the government should do it. That's the cost-benefit analysis rule. That is the rule that Ronald Reagan imposed when he implemented this famous, I can't remember the number, famous presidential executive order that said that all government regulations must be subjected to a rigorous cost-benefit analysis before they're approved. Okay? It doesn't actually say they have to pass cost-benefit analysis, but they have to be subjected to cost-benefit analysis. And cost-benefit analysis is simply the Hicks-Calder rule. That the net benefits have to outweigh the net costs, regardless of who gets the benefits and who gets the costs. Well, this is a situation where the smoker gets the benefits and the costs. And they're telling us that the costs outweigh the benefits for them. And we're saying, yeah, but because we get your tax money, we don't count that as a cost to society as a whole. So this sort of very, very standard cost-benefit rule, this Hicks-Calder rule that we know and are so familiar with, that policy analysts are so comfortable with these days, it really becomes a little bit questionable. It's not quite clear what we should do here. Okay, so thank you very much for pointing out that I skipped that. So now I want to keep pushing on this beta-delta thing and this idea that people might want help achieving optimal solutions for themselves. So we can think of the optimal syntax as a kind of commitment device for sophisticated smokers. Right? We've already seen where a sophisticated beta-delta discounter might want to either get help with some kind of commitment device or take some kind of preemptive action that would function like a commitment device. So here's an actual question. If smokers would be made better off by government provision of a commitment device in the form of a tax, why aren't they willing to pay for one? In other words, why can't the market solve this problem? If there's a demand for commitment devices, why isn't there a supply of commitment devices? Okay? Here's one possible answer. If the commitment device is provided by the same firm that provides the product that you're trying to commit yourself from overuse of, then the device itself, the commitment device, may not be profit maximizing. That doesn't show up in our graph because we didn't have supply. I just said here's the price. Okay? So we don't know what was going on with the cigarette firms. But you can think about a commitment device this way. A commitment device is a way for the firm to be able to contract with the patient self instead of the impatient self. Right? If you buy your cigarettes a pack at a time, well, even if you don't, the firm is entering into a contract when you buy cigarettes with your impatient self, because that's the self you are when you're making the decision. The commitment device is a way of saying, let me make a decision now to say yes to this commitment device or vote for this tax, whatever it is, when I'm feeling patient about my future smoking. It's like, give me one more pack. Give me one more pack while I vote for this tax. Right? So I'm going to be impatient about the smoking I do on voting day, but I'm going to be patient about voting for the tax or buying the commitment device, whatever it is. So it allows the firm to contract with your patient self. Right? So a huge dimension of what we can learn from the beta-delta model is that if you can move decisions from now to sometime other than, if you can get the decision away from the immediate cost or benefit, you can help a lot. Okay? So what the tax does is it says, let me just impose a tax on you every time you smoke. What the voting for the tax does is it says, let me give you a choice about your future smoking that you can make in a cool, calm, considered state when you're in your patient self, rather than forcing you to make that decision when you're impatient. The point is that if the patient self's gain in surplus from a commitment device is less than the firm's loss of profit from the impatient self, then the firm will not have incentive to provide the commitment device. Right? So if it's up to the cigarette companies, for example, to sell you a special contract, like let's say they take your fingerprint, and every time you buy cigarettes, you have to show your fingerprint, and then if you've chosen this commitment contract, you have to pay an extra fee. Well, if that's going to cost them more because you smoke less, then they benefit because you're only going to be willing to pay the amount that benefits you. Right? But the cost to them of lost profit from the fact that you don't smoke as much might be greater than the benefit to you, and so they wouldn't be willing to provide it. And furthermore, the sophisticate may actually be only partially sophisticated. Right? Maybe you know you have a problem, but you underestimate the magnitude of the problem, in which case you would underestimate the value of the commitment device. Yeah? So now I want to show you, no I don't, I'm a couple slides away from that. So one possibility is that a third party might be able to profitably provide a commitment device, so then they don't have to care about whether or not the firm is losing profits. But it's not clear that this technology is always possible. How would a third party firm impose a tax on cigarettes? Well, we're going to create this system of fingerprinting, and we're going to somehow convince every single store that sells cigarettes. No, that doesn't seem like it would work. Could they maybe set up a situation where you have to pay them a penalty if you don't pass a smoking test like once a week? There's these very, very accurate and reliable tests for smoking. You give this person urinalysis once a week, or maybe it's even I can't remember it's breath, urine, or blood, or maybe it's even a swab from your mouth. I can't remember. It's very, very effective. And then we're going to test you.